Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Fedex St Jude Championship. Gonna break down how I'm approaching this slate, give you some of the key stats and comp courses that I'm using to go after some of my top plays, and then afterwards we'll go through some of my exposure heading into this week. That'll be for DFS, some core plays and value plays, as well as any outright bets and placement bets that I've already gone with. Last week, we weren't able to hit an outright over here, but definitely had some guys in contention there in Saturday, Sunday, so that at least gave us a solid sweat. But let's get back on the wagon, try and get after it, maybe take down a GPP or two in the process, and hopefully have ourselves a smash week for the first leg of those FedEx Cup playoffs. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and hop on in. Let's not dilly-dally whatsoever. Smash the like button if you haven't already, and let's hop right on into things. We're going to start things off with a look at my key stats and comp courses for the week, where if you haven't already seen my course breakdown video, I'd cover that in full detail here, but more so going to give you guys the Spark Notes version. So as I said, full breakdown already up on the channel. There's a link in the description of the video, but this is a much more positional golf course than what you have for some of the other playoff venues that we'll have over the next few weeks. It's more similar to a Sedgefield Country Club, TPC River Highlands, those other shorter positional tracks where it's about keeping yourself out of some water hazards off the tee and then hitting those tiny green complexes. So you can see up here, number one would be shots gained approach, as it pretty much always is over here on the channel. But number two is off the tee, and that is mostly your driving accuracy. So whether it's good drive percentage, whether it's driving accuracy out there, both of those going to be extremely important. In terms of your approach profile, you don't have a ton of wedges, even though this is a shorter golf course, because of all the forced layups off the tee. So a majority of your iron shots, pretty similar to a Sedgefield Country Club, are going to come from 125 out there to 200 yards. So if there's any proximity buckets that I'm higher on this week than most, it would be there from about 125 out there to 200. Your putting can't be ignored. This is a golf course where some of your shorter, more positional players have gone nuclear with the flat stick. So if you want to look at some putting form heading in, I think that makes a lot of sense. And because we do have that same champion Bermuda grass as what we had at the Wyndham, I'm also taking a look at players on that surface. Birdie or better percentage, always important when we're trying to find poppers with fantasy score. Around the green, something you can't ignore, but just 4,000 square foot greens and a ton of comp courses that I've included. So you can see on here that we've got the Travelers, Wyndham that I've mentioned, TPC River, Twin Cities out there with the 3M Open, but also some Florida tracks. We've got PGA National down there, Innisbrook Copperhead course, a very different agronomy situation, but the Pebble Beach Pro-Am with some tiny fairways and tiny greens, all good comp courses for what we're going to get here. And Waialae, short positional track, very hard to hit fairways around there, that also has Bermuda grass from tip to toe. Valero Texas Open, different sort of agronomy, but the one thing you get in common with all these different golf courses is a similar type of approach profile, and that accuracy off the tee being the dominant force as opposed to that driving distance. So I think all of them are solid to look at for some comps. And anytime we're talking about one of these other golf courses, a lot of times TPC Southwind is towards the top of our comp list. So not a surprise that you'd find all those in my modeling, and hopefully it gives you an idea for how we're approaching this week. Again, full course breakdown is already posted on the channel if you want even more details on my modeling process. But let's take that, go over here to the DFS and outright betting side, and give you guys an idea of the sort of players that I'm getting to. And of course, if you feel like tailing any of these out there for outrights or in your exposure, feel free to do so, but that is not the point of these videos, right? More so to be process based, give you guys an idea for what I'm looking for in players to go out there, take a nugget or two out there into your process, and to hopefully deploy it yourself. So we're going to start it off with Collin Morikawa up here at $10,000 on Draftkings. I took him at 15 to 1 with a 10% boost, so I was able to get plus 1650 myself. So that was the best number by far available on the market at 15 to 1. You get the boost, and it was a much better number than any other book. So that's going to be a tough one to go out there and replicate. But what I love about Morikawa is he's my first off number 4 total model ranking play here, and a lot of those stats that we talked about are things that he shines in, right? The mid to long irons, those are where he excels and is one of the best players in the world. He's a very accurate driver of the ball. He's also been a lot better on bent grass this year than what we've seen for the rest of his career, so not a surprise that he's finding my way into my betting card. And I've been a little bit of a sucker for him this year. I've played him a lot in DFS, which has worked out quite well, but he has not had a win other than that Zozo Championship. So he's just had top 5, top 10 after top 10, just getting close but no cigar time and time again out there. But I think eventually he's going to break through. He's the kind of player that in the past had popped out there for wins quite often and maybe wasn't as consistent. So I would argue that he's a much better player now than what he was back in the day. It's just that he's got to find a way to keep it together for all 4 rounds. He's just a different animal at this stage. I would argue that, again, he's better at this point with his consistency. It's just yet to translate into another major out there for him, or out there in another signature sort of event, going out there and getting the job done. So I think it's a matter of when, not if, that is going to happen for Collin Morikawa. And at a golf course that accentuates a lot of his strengths, that's the kind of spot that I want to get exposure to him. So whether it's in DFS, I think $10,000 is a very fair price tag. The pricing is extremely soft down there in the 7K range. So a lot of spots you could use to offset that kind of salary. And he's going to be relatively high owned, I would imagine. I can't imagine that he'll be, lower owned than an Aubert. I think he'll be in that same sort of range as a Fleetwood and a Cantlay. So I don't think you're going to get different with him in your lineups, but that's going to be the case for most guys up top. I think Aubert, probably your lowest owned player. These top 3 are always going to get their share of exposure. So there's not many options to go after for that leverage up top. So I don't think you have to worry about that as much towards the top end of your player pool. And from the outright perspective, if I think he's got a good chance to go out there and cash that outright, then he's probably a decent idea to go out there and include in lineups. Next up, we got Corey Conners at $9,100. I took him at 40 to 1 for an outright, and another very accurate driver of the golf ball that is good for those mid to long irons. So the same sort of profile as a Morikawa at the courses where he's going to shine, or where you're going to see Corey Conners popping off as well. So just to show you the shots gained metrics for the last 2 over their last 12, meant to show this with Morikawa, but you can see doing almost all of his work with the approach play, which is pretty much exactly what we want to see. Corey Conners a little bit more balanced. He is gaining across all 4 stat categories, but still gaining a respectable 0.79 shots gained approach per round. So both of the kind of form that we're looking for heading in. That's even with Morikawa maybe having a slightly disappointing Olympic performance. Outside of that, it's been vintage Morikawa and vintage Corey Conners out here. So I kind of worry about the upside for the win with Corey, right? Outside of his win at the Valero Texas Open, he's had a little bit of trouble getting into that top 3 or winning, which for DFS at $9,100, I think makes him an even better option. But if there's a course where he's going to go out there and actually get the job done, it's one like this, where his hyper accurate play off the tee can really pay off. Where on Bermuda grass, kind of like Morikawa, he's been a lot better over the last year or so. It's just a lot of different things colliding at the same time to make this a really good setup for Corey Conners. So I'm not usually a huge fan of him. In fact, I play him a lot less than other people out there because of that lack of top end upside. But, I was struggling with myself all morning on whether I was going to take him for an outright, and just the course fit is just too solid for me to pass up. So, if he's going to be super chalky in DFS, maybe I'll revisit that conversation. But I think that guys like Russell Henley are probably going to be even higher owned, so I can't see him getting out of touch when it comes to the ownership. He's appropriately priced. I think $9,100 is maybe even a slightly more expensive price tag than where he should come in. And the result of that might be a more reasonable ownership number. You've got Hideki right above him, who of course had the really solid performance at the Olympics. You've got Cantlay up there at $9,700. You have Tom Kim, also Russell Henley, who I've already mentioned will be relatively popular, that are hopefully going to keep him in that 15% or lower range. Next up, we got Billy Horschel, who has a really good track record around this course. Not so much in the last 2 years that they've played the playoff event here, but when it was the Fedex St Jude Classic. This event was a WGC for a few years. Before that, it was a regular tour stop, the Fedex St Jude Classic, and Billy Horschel has made a living around this golf course. So at 50 to 1, I think he's playing some of the best golf that we've seen for quite some time. And based on his attitude on the golf course, he really seems to be in a good headspace. You saw that with Aaron Ride down the stretch. He was rooting him on harder than he was even playing for himself. And you like to see the happy, go fun, sort of Billy Horschel. When he was in that down stretch of golf, I was at a lot of events where he struggled, and you could see it on his face. He wasn't interacting with his partners. He didn't look like he wanted to be out there, and you can tell that he's really found something with his game. Whether it's the last 24 measured rounds, whether you zoom in on the last 12 measured rounds, both of them have been excellent in terms of sample size. So you can see over the last 24, gaining across all 4 stat categories, just vintage Billy Ho stuff. He's going to hit a bunch of fairways for you. He's a really good Bermuda grass putter. You know that with his familiarity on the surface. And then you look at the last 12 measured rounds, and it's even better. You can see the shots gained metrics from tee to green are excellent. He's gaining 0.84 shots gained approach per round over his last 12. Off the tee, he's been there. He's been one of the most accurate drivers over that stretch as well. And if anything, the putter has actually let him down a little bit. And perhaps part of that is the fact that he's been playing overseas for some of the events, has the sample size on that fescue as opposed to that Bermuda grass, where you can see on Bermuda, he gains about a half a stroke putting per round. So I love the tee to green form. I like what he did at Sedgefield. Obviously, no win out there for him, but still had a very respectable performance. And at 50-1, I thought was worth the shot out there for an outright. And for DFS, I think is an even better play. So, I actually think he has a better chance to win than somebody like Corey Connors. But yeah, Coco at 40-1, I've got to say he's probably the nastiest outright that I've took for a while. That one's just more of a hunch there. But Billy Ho was one of my first clicks of the week. I was super excited to take him at 50-1. And yeah, sometimes the nasty ones are the ones that come through. So I wouldn't write off Corey Connors quite yet. But Billy Horschel was pretty much a slam dunk play for me. You play him at these shorter Bermuda grass sort of tracks. The form is there. The outright number was good enough for me. So why not get some exposure? I'm also taking some Justin Thomas at $8,400. He's 40-1 to win. And when this was a WGC, was able to come through for a win. So I don't think a lot of people will attribute that to this golf course. In fact, when you're looking at course history, a lot of databases, a lot of sites probably aren't going to show that for JT, but around TPC Southwind has a dub, which a lot of players in this range can't say. He's coming in with okay enough form for me. In fact, if you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, you can see that outside of the off the tee play has been vintage JT stuff. But the last 24 rounds, I think, tell a little bit more of the story. You can see he's losing a little bit with the putter, which can happen for him. In fact, that's his career baseline out there, right? He's been a below average putter for most of his career, but the things that matter around the green, he's always maybe one of the best, if not the best player in any given field, and the irons have been there. The irons have come back. He's at these sort of golf courses. Again, if we look at some of the comps down here, Innisbrook has been in contention the last few years. He's got a win around TPC Sawgrass, which I know I don't have it on here as a comp, but is a pretty decent comp course. He's won at PGA National. A lot of the other tracks on here, like Wyndham Championship, he's had a really good track record around, which you wouldn't necessarily think of when you first think of Justin Thomas. You think, he's not the most accurate off the tee. He is from South Florida. He's very familiar with Bermuda, so that part checks out. The iron play, too, mid to long irons, one of the best players out there. I think what people forget about this sort of golf course is that it forces you to lay up. And a lot of these other tracks that I mentioned down here, Sony Open, by the way, pretty good track record for JT, too. The reason why he's found success at a lot of these is probably because he can't miss with the iron off the tee. He's not hitting a driver. He's not missing by 30, 40 yards all that often. And if he can avoid the water out there this weekend, that is a huge if. He's seemingly has a magnet in his golf ball for the water lately. If he keeps it out of it, the rest of the game checks out. And you've seen it go out there and execute and turn into wins before on these short sort of golf courses. So I think it'll go under the radar. I do not think that JT is going to be chalky this week, partially because the form has been a little bit erratic over his last 12 or 24 measured rounds, but it has been far from horrible, right? We took a look at both of those sample sizes. Again, not going to wow you over either sample, but good enough for me to go out there and get some exposure. So you've seen it before at this event. He's won in a strong WGC sort of field. It's a no-cut event this week. I know it's not a WGC format, or I should say hosted event, but same sort of rules, right? No cut, same size of field. Maybe he goes out there and can repeat what he did in the past. For our value plays, we're going to start it off with, first off, Matt Fitzpatrick here, who I'm taking for a top 10 at plus 400. So no outright on Matty Fitz, but another player that at this golf course has an amazing track record. And some of you might not know that, right? If you're looking at your different databases, because he did it as a WGC and also did it when this was the FedEx St Jude Classic. He has 3 top 6 finishes at this golf course, which makes sense if you take a look at his comp course history on some of the other similar sort of tracks. And kind of like JT, he's been very erratic lately, but these layup golf courses where you're not spraying driver all over the place has been really good for his game, and you've seen him come through for some of those top 10s. So that's why I took the exposure from that placement perspective. He's not gone out there and won before. Also, the form is really sketchy. So if we take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, it's going to make you want to throw up a little bit. He's losing in both the ball striking categories, only gaining but the flat stick, which is about the opposite from what we're sort of looking for in a player. However, there are spots where you're going to have to forgive and forget, right? DFS is a game where you're going to get a few guys that pop off out of nowhere, and usually the best candidates to go out there and do so are players returning to a golf course where they have that course history, where they can go out there, try and get those good vibes and channel into those what they've done in the past, and they have a game plan for any given golf course. So whether it's that strategy perspective that goes out there and really benefits a Matt around this golf course, or just the fact that his game meshes up well with what this golf course ask from you, that's the sort of player that I'm looking to get to for that bet. So a player that I'm using in DFS will be essentially unowned in that format. So if you're somebody like myself that finds some sort of upside in that player, then he's going to be a spot that you can leverage to the field and get a ton over the field on. I mean, you're probably looking at sub 5% ownership, I'd imagine, on this sort of play, which in a 70 player field is going to be extremely hard to come by. So maybe he'll be slightly over 5% by the time we get to Wednesday, but in this range, I can't imagine anyone's going to come in with lower ownership. So if you're giving me a course history guy, a guy who's also a really good putter on Bermuda grass, a chance out there in this field, I'll take it at plus 400. Next up, we got Brian Harman, who's another elite level course history guy, has a few top 10s around TPC Southwind, both when it was this event, top 3 a few years ago, and top 10s when this was the Fedex St Jude Classic. So another guy that maybe will get slept on a little bit because he only has that one top 3 and a lot of databases, but top 10 at plus 400 was solid value compared to some other sports books out there. And if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, has been quietly getting the job done. You can see gaining in 3 of the 4 stat categories. Around the green, you don't worry about with Brian Harman. He's one of the better chippers of the golf ball on the entire tour, if not the world. You go down to the last 24 round sample size, so zoom out a little bit, and it's much of the same, right? Gaining across all 4 stat categories. And when I was running my model earlier on Bet the Number for our course preview, if you take a look at 125 to 150, also that 150 to 175 yard range, he's one of the best players in the entire world. So really, the more that you look at the advanced analytics, the more that you're going to want to play a Brian Harman. You're looking for an accurate driver of the golf ball, he checks that box for you. You're looking for a guy that gains a bunch of strokes out there on Bermuda grass, well, he's going to check that box for you. And like I said, the course history is also a little bit underrated. So $7,600, I do think that he's going to get some ownership, unlike a Matt Fitzpatrick, but I get it, right? He checks a lot of the boxes that people are going to be looking for this week. And the top 10 at plus 400, also that solid value compared to other spots, was something that I wanted to go out there and mix in. I also want to mention, guys, if you're looking for access to everything you see on these spreadsheets, well, as it says on the caption on here, make sure to check out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description to the video to that, and on there is where you can download these with everything uncensored. So that'll have my projections, my modeling, and I'll have recent form on there. You'll have the actual finishes for players, event history included. You can see on here, right, I only have 2 actual years of data from this golf course and event. The other 3 have an asterisk as they're not at TPC Southwind, but all of this is included over there on the Patreon page. So if you've been wondering how to get all of that information, right, for every single player on the field, not just the 8 that we talk up here in the videos, well, that's how to get that information. On there, of course, you're helping support the channel with that, and for just $15 a month, you can get access to the Golf DFS tier. Not only do you get the spreadsheets for the main slate for every event, but also for showdown and rounds 2 through 4. So if you're somebody that plays the single round slates over the weekend, you'll also have an ability to do that as well. So I update my projections for that. We've got ownership for all the different showdown slates, which isn't something that you can find on all the Golf DFS sites out there, and all for, again, a very reasonable price of $15. So if you've been wondering how to get access to these, that is exactly how you can do so. Help support the channel and what I'm doing over here on YouTube, and again, gives you all the information at your disposal. It should speed up your time out there with your DFS process, right? Having all this information congregated into one exact spot, and also it's going to give you a lot of perspective for how I'm approaching any given slate. I've got my outright outrights on there. You've got my player poll to take a reference at, all of those sort of things. Also a Discord server to ask any questions you have with either me or the community to go out there and improve your process. So it'll speed it up. You will obviously become a better player having some of that perspective, and I think something you guys should check out. Next up though, we got 2 more value plays to go out there and wrap up this video. They got Keegan Bradley at $7,000 first. So I took him for an outright at 100 to 1. So that was just a little bit of a sprinkle. The bigger bet I did was a top 10 at plus 600. And it's not the course history. If you take a look at his TPC Southwind record, it's not pretty to say the least. But last week, it looked like he found something at Wyndham Championship, at Sedgefield Country Club. He gained in all 4 stat categories. In fact, the only category where he wasn't gaining over 2 strokes to the field was out there with this putter, which was about average over the 4 rounds. Off the tee doing his thing, he gained like 2.5 strokes out there with his approach play. Short game was relatively stout, and it's a very similar setup, right? From tee to green, you're getting asked pretty much the same question as you're getting asked from the previous golf tournament, and I like that a whole lot. I think he's going to be overlooked. I do not think he'll be chalky whatsoever. I think there are other guys in this range like Max Grazerman that we'll talk about here in a second that could be twice, even 3 times as owned as somebody like a Keegan Bradley. So kind of like a Matt Fitzpatrick, it's one of the more sneaky options that I'm looking to get to. And on other sports books, Keegan Bradley is down at like plus 490 for a top 10 or even plus 500. So the plus 600 number I was able to find was something that I went out there and bet with a full unit bet, which isn't always the case with one of these value options down low. And then the last value I want to point out here would be Max Grazerman. And I guess before I fully talk about Grazerman, I do want to point out the shots gained metrics for Keegan. Look at the tee to green stuff, right? He's about average around the green. It's like, okay, that's not that much of an issue for me. I'm much more worried about these 2 ball striking categories. 0.4 strokes off the tee, 0.25 shots per round on the approach. So I know it hasn't been flashy stuff for Keegan, but he's been good enough for me recently to go out there and get some exposure. And now we got the Max Grazerman talk, who this guy has finished runner-up in back-to-back weeks. He's been close, no cigar out there for the outright. So I did, once again, sprinkle him out there at 100 to 1 for an outright. But this golf course sets up very similar to the last 2 events. 3M Open was one of our comp courses, if you'll remember. You can see down here, right, TPC Twin Cities. And then, of course, the Wyndham Championship, my number 2 comp course. So if he's gone second at both events, he's probably a good look at this golf course. He's gained over 11 shots gained to the field the last 2 weeks, which is next level stuff. He's, look at this, the number 3 recent form player in the field. And that's despite his 3rd event from previous not being that great of a start. He's getting 0.73 shots gained putting per round on Bermuda grass. Relatively accurate driver, really good from 125 to 175 yards. Just checks every box that we're looking for. So, you know, Grazerman, it kind of feels like you're buying them after we probably should have, right? The 2nd place finishes were the spot to get that exposure, but maybe he can parlay it into a 3rd straight week. This is something we've seen before. We've seen guys like Billy Ho get hot over the FedEx Cup playoffs and go out there and take it home. Hovland last year got hot for this recent stretch. You had Glover win the Wyndham and then go out there and win this very golf tournament the week after. I think there's precedent for trying to find the hot hand at this kind of event. So these golf courses recently have all been very similar in terms of the skill set required. So maybe there's a reason that you've seen guys get hot and have that kind of stretch. So he's $6,900. Again, the top 10 at plus 600 was the one I was much happier about. And some books already had him into the plus 400 range when it came to that kind of bet. So I think a little bit of value there if you're able to catch that same kind of number, and he'll be super chalky. I mean, there's just no way that people aren't going to play him in DFS. So in large field GPPs, I might be a little bit more hesitant to use him in that format. But if you're playing like a outright bet, I think that's a good way to maybe get some exposure there. Just hope that he can get first rather than runner up for like the 3rd straight week. And then the top 10 might be another good market to go out there and mix him in. If he's going to be a 15-20% owned to DFS, I might have to rethink whether I use him in that format. But all those different other ways of getting exposure, right, aren't contingent on how chalky or popular a play he is. So I'm on the Grazerman train. I get it. I think the golf course similarities are a good reason to maybe try and ride that hot hand. And it's the last piece of exposure that I wanted to talk about here in the video. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the DFS and betting preview. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button if you haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. That of course will include our Wednesday live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern time, going over any of your live questions, a weather report ownership out there before lock, making sure you're ready for all of your exposure out there Thursday. It'll be be an epic week, a great field, also a golf course that I think is heavily underrated and should be a fun one. So if you want to earn a free month of that Patreon, by the way, we're going to do the same giveaway we've done the last few weeks. Go ahead, give me your favorite outright bet. So if they go out there, win the thing, you will win that free month of the Patreon page. The only contingency is that they have to be at least 25 to 1 to go out there and win. So give me your best guess, at least 25 to 1 to go out there and take it home. And if you end up being right, you will win that free month of the Patreon page. Again, if you want access to that now, you don't want to wait for this giveaway, go out there, just click the link in the description and go ahead and join. The $15 DFS tier will give you access to all the spreadsheets that you see throughout my content. And then the prop tier will give you access to the stuff I'm doing on Underdog and Prize Picks. So whichever one fits the bill, go ahead and check it out if you're interested in that. And best of luck with all of your exposure this week. Should be a fun one, as I mentioned. Looking forward to this stud field, and let's go out there and make it one to remember.